Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. He published a book back in 2021, December 6th, 2021. Title of it is It Did Not Start with JFK, and it's a 2-volume set. The book volume we're going to talk about today is The Decades of Events That Led to the Assassination of John F. Kennedy. The author's name is Walter Herbst, Herbst. And right now on Amazon in the US, the volume 1 has 18 5-star reviews. And I think it's really important, his approach of getting into this book, because it really informs everything that led up to what happened in November 22nd, 1963. And there's a lot of information, and there's a lot of very curious characters that are involved in the JFK assassination. So we can go into some of the culture and the individuals in the background in this book. It did not start with JFK. So Walter Herbst, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Well, William, thanks very much for having me.
So for people who may not have heard of your name, I think I saw your book on Ed Opperman. Can you talk about your background? You do talk about it in the intro, but talk about kind of the influence of JFK and how you got interested in researching and what led you to put together this book. It did not start with JFK.
Certainly. Well, I was 6 years old when JFK got assassinated, right? And so too young to really have any effect on me. But, you know, if anyone who was alive at the time doesn't forget it. And as time went by, there would be articles in the paper, this or that, about Jack Ruby and gun running or what have you, and I would see it. And I never really got into it until my mid-20s. And I was given a book by a friend, Best Evidence, about the autopsy of JFK. And I read that, and it was like eye-opening for me, right? I mean, it was clear that something was, the autopsy was not a definitive, clear a picture of what happened to JFK. I mean, there was some terrible things that happened there. And so anyway, so that got me started. And I spent the next, 30, 40 years investigating, reading everything I could, the assassination of JFK. And it took me to a point where I kind of reached about a few years ago, not a dead end, but there were some facts that I saw that just didn't make sense, you know. 1963, you have JFK. He's already agreed not to invade Cuba because of the agreement of the missile crisis. But he's telling his people, look, just in case the Russians go into West Berlin, be prepared. If they do that, we're going into Cuba. Then he's also normalizing relations, or trying to, with the Soviet Union and with Castro at the same time. Meanwhile, Robert Kennedy got his own effort to try and take back Cuba, but he's bringing in left-wing Cubans, anti-Castro Cuban exiles, ones who at one time supported Castro, and he's kind of blocking out the CIA out of the whole thing. Now, while this is going on, there's this fellow, Thomas Eli Davis, who's this American mercenary, and he is down in Haiti, and he's organizing a mercenary army trying to invade Haiti for whatever reason. Could be a jumping off point to get Castro, what have you. Okay, so also in Haiti at the same time is George de Mohrenschildt, who is, anyone who has studied the assassination knows, he befriended Oswald after he returned from the Soviet Union to the United States. No one can understand the relationship. There's something about that's sinister. I mean, he has CIA intelligence connections, and he's down in Haiti as well. And is there a connection between all of that? You know, possibly. Now, this Thomas Eli Davis, then, 16 days after the assassination, he gets arrested or apprehended in Morocco. He, with a letter with the name Oswald and referencing the assassination of JFK. Now, it turns out to be that this Oswald is a Victor Oswald in Spain. It's not Lee Harvey Oswald, but Victor Oswald had CIA connections and was a gun running and what have you. And it's a whole myriad of connections that you develop, and this is all going on. And I'm asking myself, is this connected? Are these separate? Is it possible that there were two independent things going on, or maybe multiple things? Meanwhile, Lee Harvey Oswald is back, and I'm investigating him, and I'm seeing when he goes to the Soviet Union, there's some weird things going on. I mean, his Department of Defense ID card when he comes back from there, issued to him at El Toro in California when he left the Marines. The picture looks different than his passport photo, even though it occurred around the same time. He has a phony A.J. Hiddle, right, the alias that he allegedly used, card on his possession when he's arrested, with the same photo as the DOD card, but different than he's 5'11" when he goes to the Marines. He looks like he's 5'9" when he comes back, but there's no way it's the same person. So anyway, there's stuff going on. So I started to look a little deeper, and then what got to me too was I found there were in 20 months before and after the JFK assassination, there's like 15 attempts at overthrowing governments, assassinating foreign leaders, all leftist leaders, leftist governments, by right-wing military coups, most of them involving the CIA and the U.S. military. Oswald gets arrested. He asked for this fellow named John Abt to represent him. John Abt he did represent communists, so that was, everyone thought he asked for that reason, except for one thing. John Abt, in the 40s, there was a law passed, the Smith Act, passed by Congress, which basically said that an individual can be tried for trying to overthrow the U.S. government by himself, even if he's part of a group. And applying that to Oswald, I mean, you can make the connection and say, "Whoa!" I mean,
It is remarkable that he knew the right lawyer after it happened. So ABT, his name was John Abt.
That's correct. I mean, how does he know these things? I mean, I mean, we can go off on a sidebar for a second, but he applies to Albert Schweitzer College on his way to defect to the Soviet Union. No one in the United States really knew Albert Schweitzer College. And this is some guy who spent the last couple of years in the Marines in Japan, comes back to California, and he knows about it, right? So how does he know all of this all the time? Then the one thing that got me going was the United States military, in particular, CIA, wanted to get rid of Castro. Military, Cuban Missile Crisis, they were ready to go in guns blazing and just take out Fidel Castro, take over the island, and this is what they wanted, right? Well documented. CIA hired the mafia figures to try and kill him, plus other assassination attempts. Kennedy gets assassinated by this alleged communist, Oswald, member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, defected to the Soviet Union, said he was going to give military secrets to the Russians, and we do nothing. I mean, if there was an opportunity to just go in, take Castro out, and then by the time the smoke cleared and you found out what really happened, who Oswald was, I mean, Castro would be gone. That was it. Nothing happened. So I started to think, let me go back and see if I can find some connection between all these groups, these individuals, in the decades before the Kennedy assassination. Maybe you can find, I mean, if I was going to investigate World War I, Civil War, whatever, I wouldn't start, say, Civil War with Fort Sumter. I'd go back in the decades before and just say, how did this animosity get to where it was? So I did that, and that's basically what the book is about. And I went back all the way to the 1930s and kind of started with maybe the 1920s, really. And there was this concern after World War I. Europe was in disarray, and what was going to happen with all of these immigrants who wanted to come from Europe to the United States, and many of them were from Slavic countries, Southern Europe, Jewish people that the elites in this country did not want into this country. There was this right-wing elite group that, and this is not a party affiliation. In those days, it was basically based on money. You could be Democrat, you could be Republican, but you felt like you wanted to control who was coming into this country, and you wanted it to be from Northern Europe. And so they passed the in 1924 an immigration law that restricted people coming into this country from anywhere from basically Northern Europe. And on top of that, they went back to 1890 census when the disparity between other groups and Northern Europeans was greater, so they could really control it, right? And then it all was spawned by this pseudoscience called eugenics, that basically believed your bloodline determined who you were going to be. If your father was a thief, you're going to be a thief. If your father was a decent person, you're going to be a decent person. And the country was going around sterilizing Americans based on that. Throughout, I mean, it's unbelievable. They even talked about killing people if we had to get to that point. And it went to the Supreme Court, and Oliver Wendell Holmes gave a ruling, basically, which said 3 generations of criminals is enough. So if that's what you have in your background, we're going to sterilize you and prevent you from, continuing the family line.
Right. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Germans got a lot of their eugenics ideas from the States. And I actually went to a name that you mentioned in your book, Jordan. I went to Jordan Middle School in Palo Alto, where there was rife with a lot of eugenicists.
Yes.
Sherman. There was a big thing that happened in Northern California where there was a eugenicist hotspot. And other guys, I can't remember some of these characters' names, but they were around. Shackley, I think it's Theodore Shackley.
Right.
They were all eugenicists, and they all did a lot of writing and pre-Nazi. So
right. And then on the East Coast, you had the Carnegie Institute, you had the Rockefeller Foundation, all donating. The Harriman family, right? Averell Harriman, well-known politician, but his father was a railroad tycoon, very wealthy. They were funding this eugenicist on Long Island in New York group to try and just control the population in his country. Then what? The next thing that got to me was it was in the early 1930s. I mean, FDR is president, and there's this group that wants to remove him from power forcibly. And they go over and they study Mussolini, they study Hitler. It's this right-wing group. It's an elitist group. It's backed by wealthy people in the country. Groups like the Remington arms dealers who made a fortune in World War I are backing it. And they basically want to raise a 500,000 man army from the American Legion and have them basically go to FDR, and you have a choice. We're going to either remove you from power keep you in power, and you're just going to be a figurehead, and we'll call the shots, or we're going to just forcibly remove you from power. Well, they made the mistake of going to this fellow Smedley Butler, who's like a hero in American history. That's an unknown hero, who said no to what they wanted to do, went to Congress, testified in front of Congress. They had hearings. Congress confirmed that everything I just said was true. There was an attempt to take over the country, but the people were too powerful to do anything about it, right? And there were others.
It couldn't be done. They could be exposed, but not tried.
Right. I mean, and it really, you kind of almost, there are parallels to today, aren't there? That you can even look at this, right? This Ukraine thing. We don't know the behind the scenes, whatever's going on. I mean, we're very upset, but we're really not doing that much. You could look at post Kennedy, from Johnson to Nixon to Ford. If you have the money and the power, you're going to be immune, especially back in that era. And then there was a deep state government that was already trying to run the government, the Council of Foreign Relations and various groups like that. And there's
a lot happening. FDR was under attack the whole time. The elites of that he was part of didn't like him.
No,
he was way too egalitarian in his sensibilities. He was kind of like a class betrayer in a lot of ways. However, I do think that his policies righted the country. I think he really just used practical things, but wasn't the sensibility. He was, and you say in your book, assassination attempt, overthrow. They were constantly, and I think that it was Prescott Bush was also part of that fascist movement too.
100%. 100%. And Prescott
Which
Bush
is telling you.
Yes, definitely. And even it goes up to the entire Bush family leading up to the assassination. But in that early 1930s, I mean, it was basically self-determination, where the elites thought, I'm not going to give you my for the New Deal, I'm not going to give you my money without my permission. I should decide what I want to do. That was their argument. And they also thought that they looked at the U.S. Constitution and they thought that was a violation of the Constitution. They looked at Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, right? Life, liberty, and a pursuit of property, which pursuit of happiness. But Jefferson took that from John Locke, the English philosopher, who said life, liberty, and a pursuit of property. And they looked at that and they said, no, this is a violation of the Constitution. We are not going to stand for it. And they didn't. But that led one thing to another, and then next thing you know, Nazis are in power in Europe, and you have very powerful people in the United States. You have the Dulles brothers that would play a role in the United States history for the next 30, 40 years. John Foster would become Eisenhower's Secretary of State. Allen Dulles become director of the CIA in his golden years under Eisenhower, and they worked for Sullivan and Cromwell, a law firm that supported Germany, Nazi Germany. You had people, as the war started, calling these two guys traitors. And they were not the only ones. I mean, there were a lot of rich, wealthy people that were making money off of Nazi Germany that did not want that supported that, and they basically did not object to what the Germans were doing, even after it became known what was happening with the Holocaust and things like that. They still supported Nazi Germany, and it all goes back to that eugenics philosophy of Northern European bloodline, and we want to promote that, and we want the United States to promote that.
I found it interesting. You had a little exchange between Joe Kennedy and Joe Jr.
Yes.
They sounded just like Nazis. I didn't know that. Yeah, and that probably made people think Joe was one of us, right? He was kind of I think Joe Kennedy was a Hitler sympathizer, if I remember correctly, when he was ambassador to the UK. Is that right?
That's right. You're correct. He was ambassador to UK. And, there were some people who were Hitler supporters because they thought, let's get on the winning side. And they expected, before the war started, that the Germans were more powerful and couldn't be stopped. And there are other people that just bought into, drank the Kool-Aid. And that literally supported Nazi Germany. And I think it was Joe Jr. that said something like, well, in Germany, it's a shame what's happening to the Jews, but you know what? They kind of have all of the high-paying jobs and this or that, and there must be some truth to it. The German complaints about them, if they wouldn't be doing this unless there was a reason. But so they kind of justified what they were doing, and it was not that. There was the Liberty League in the United States and different groups that supported this action as well. I mean, you had America First going back to that era. But America First, to a large extent, was people who just thought, we just got over World War I. Let's not fight another European war. Let's stay out of it. But there were, involved with them people who were they supported the Nazis and would have expected or hoped the United States would be on board on the side of the Nazis. And fortunately, they didn't win out.
There was a battle for the sympathy, right? Lindbergh, the Nordic League. There was like the Bund, right, in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, Lindbergh was an interesting character. Even to the point where he had this second family in Germany that no one ever knew about, and his family here, right? And everyone knows about what happened with his son and kidnapping, murder, and but yeah, he was pro-Nazi. Was over in Germany with Hermann Goering, getting a medal from them, coming back and basically saying in the United States, their Air Force is powerful, their military is powerful. We have to be on their side. And he actually filled like Madison Square Garden in New York City, right? I mean, with just supporters trying to push that Nazi agenda, right? So, but
it was an open question. Yeah, there wasn't. It wasn't fully assured, probably until they declared war on us, right?
I think so. You're right. I think once
December
that happened,
7th, 41. Yeah,
that's right. Well, once the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and Hitler, in his infinite wisdom, declared war on the United States. Right, one of the smartest things. I say that jokingly, obviously.
Right. He had a really caricatured view of the U.S. If you read his speeches to other Germans, he had like a Hollywood idea of the U.S. Right. He had that same view of the Russians too. He thought the Russians were going to just collapse, which they didn't. They actually really did most of the fighting. But Hitler's go back and look at Hitler's view of the U.S. Just he was much more provincial than people think. He had no clue about the U.S., how violent the country.
A lot of people underestimate our patriotism in this country. I mean, because we have free dialogue and people have a right to disagree. But if something happens, and we saw it at 9/11, you saw it during World War II and at various times, people do come together and support this country. And no doubt it'll happen in the future if we're ever forced to do that again. But
the U.S. has been at war like most of its entire history. Like that's the whole strange thing. Like they think it's an open society, but it's also there's been I think we're only been through 20, 25 years of peace. Sorry.
Well, that's Eisenhower, right? With the military-industrial complex that he warned everybody about. He was right on the button. I mean, and if you go into post-World War II, Truman was looking to cut the military budget from like down to $13 billion, right? And the National Security Council, which came into being in 1947 with the CIA, they put out NSM, National Security Memorandum 68 or 86. I forget the exact. I think it was 86. Anyway, and what basically they were saying is, look, with the Russians, we can't trust them. They're building up their military. They're ready to take over Western Europe. We cannot walk away, ignore that. We need to expand our military. We're the only ones with nuclear weapons. We have to expand that and take advantage of the situation and basically attack. And Truman wasn't buying it. And with Korea started, and right, the official story is that the North Koreans started the Korean War. But in my investigation, it's I believe, and I think the facts show it out, that we really instigated, with the help of the South Koreans, to get the North Koreans to attack just so that we would get involved in the war. There are a number of very important issues that were on the table at that time. One was we had a policy of containment in effect surrounding China and Russia, Soviet Union. And that was a fellow named George Kennan, who was a diplomat, American diplomat in the Soviet Union, wrote a 5,000-word telegram after FDR requested that from him. Truman requested it, and he outlined the dangers of the Soviet Union. And so, but he also said that their economy is destined to fail, which did happen in the 80s, I would say, right? So
it took time.
It took time, and he just said, if we're patient and we don't have to attack them, we just have to contain them. All right, well, that was American policy. But then Truman looked at the cost of containing this vast area, and he came to the conclusion that we're going to let certain things go, like South Korea and Formosa, Taiwan today, because they're on the mainland, and he just anticipated, say, the Chinese and the Soviets attacking here, there, these little attacks that weren't much, but we would be trying to protect, putting our fingers in the dike at 50 different places. Well, the U.S. military, the right wing, CIA, did not appreciate letting Formosa go or letting South Korea go. MacArthur called Formosa an aircraft carrier on land because of its proximity to China and the ability to launch attacks from there. So we were looking at losing Formosa, looking at potentially losing South Korea, because if there are elections, it was most likely open elections in North and South Korea that we would lose South Korea. Meanwhile, in Japan, where MacArthur was, right? MacArthur was basically emperor of Japan at this time after World War II. There were treaties in front of at the UN as for what to do with Japan. Should the United States be allowed to stay there, maintain a military presence, or should we leave and take all the military out? These three things were on the table. It looked like the United States was going to come up short. Next thing you know, the Korean War happens. That 13 billion of Truman's turns out to be 50-something billion, right? I mean, first he just kind of panicked. The end result was that, of course, Formosa, Taiwan became you can call it a territory of the United States. South Korea still stayed under the supervision of the United States, and we stayed in Japan. And so, I mean, these are three critical things, and it led to the building of the military-industrial complex. And this is what I think Eisenhower was alluding to that, plus what happened after the Korean War, and we see it today. Military leaders, generals, admirals, high-level officials, would, when they retired from the military, would go to work for military contractors. And even military contractors would get jobs in administrations, even with Eisenhower. But so it behooved generals, admirals to keep this war machine going, because there was a lucrative job for you waiting if you once you retired and you left. You became on the board of directors, vice president, whatever, of a major military contractor. So the war machine never died, right? It hasn't. It keeps getting bigger. It doesn't end. I mean, I think we have our military machine is like bigger than the next 5 countries combined on the list, something like that, right?
Yeah, huge.
And it started at that point, right? With the
post World War II, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where I think Eisenhower was looking at this military-industrial complex and was warning the nation.
But I think he also experienced things that I think are important to the JFK assassination, because there were so many operations that he had to either okay, or I can't remember which one it was, but the CIA expected help from the military, and he said, okay, fine, let's just do it.
Right.
And I think that was telling to what happened with Kennedy in Cuba, right?
Yeah, I think you're referring to 1954 in Guatemala,
okay,
where
Benz.
Yeah, and so there he was willing to use the military, use air power to make sure we didn't lose that. And but you're right. There was a series of the CIA became basically out of control, right? A rogue agency, and they are subject to the review of Congress, and that's who allocates the amount of funding that the CIA is allowed to spend. But they were doing things on their own, and actually, before Allen Dulles became director of the CIA under Eisenhower, say that 3-4 year period, he and independently, but he and William Donovan, who was the head of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA during World War II, started these private intelligence agencies. And throughout Europe, they got involved with military intelligence and ex-Nazis who were involved in Eastern Europe in particular. And they created these stay-behind armies led by these ex-Nazis and these Eastern Europeans who supported the Nazis in various Eastern countries. And they, not that they thought they could stop the Red Army from marching into Europe, but they thought they could slow them down and at least give a chance for the United States, either through nuclear weapons or whatever, to then take care of the situation. Now, they couldn't go back to Congress for funding. So in Southeast Asia at the time, basically China, there was a fellow named Paul Helliwell, an American military officer, who went to leadership at the CIA and said, and went to Dulles and Donovan and James Angleton, and said, what we're doing is we are taking, we're kind of taking opium and exchanging it for arms. We're giving the Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese army that's in Formosa, we're giving them weapons, and they're paying for it with drugs, and we can do the same thing in Europe, and they did. And then it's really an amazing story that we employed the services of the mafia, the American mafia and the Italian mafia. I mean, the relationship between the United States and the mafia started in World War II on the docks of New York, where Lucky Luciano was in jail, but he was like the head of the mafia at the time. There was a ship called the Normandy, a French ocean liner that was being used to transport Americans back and forth to war, that was blown up in the docks of New York. Naval intelligence American naval intelligence went to the mafia and said to Meyer Lansky, we want you guys to patrol the docks and stop this. He had to go to Luciano in prison. Anyway, long story short, they did that. in addition to that, when the Allies attacked Sicily and then mainland Italy, the mafia got involved there too and helped them. They wound up becoming. It's a thin line between what some of the CIA did and what the mafia did, differentiating, right? And so they got involved with them, and so they created this program of getting the opium from Southeast Asia, sending it to Corsicans in France to process it into heroin, sending it to the States where the mafia would take it, and they distributed it into basically African American neighborhoods because they figured at that time nobody would care, wouldn't pay attention, and took the money and then used that to finance their stay-behind armies in Europe.
Right. The Gladio armies, right? Weren't they?
The Gladio, exactly. It was Gladio based on like the Roman gladiators.
Nice.
And yeah, exactly. So this was in place for a long time, and so the CIA was doing things that was beyond what their mandate was. I mean, it was like a week after JFK's assassination that it was in the Washington Post that Truman did an op-ed, and it basically said, we have to do something about this. When I put the CIA into effect, it was to be an intelligence gathering organization, not to dictate policy, create policy. He said, something's wrong and we have to correct it. Well, it wasn't corrected, but still, he recognized what was happening. And coming a week after JFK's assassination, it's telling that he had to have connected the two together, right? So, and while this,
I think he said, sorry to interrupt, but I think Truman said signing the NSA Act in 1947 was his biggest mistake.
I think you're right.
I think you're right. If I remember correctly.
Yes.
Which created the CIA and kind
of. Because not everyone wanted an intelligence organization in peacetime, right? I mean, but I think it was the KGB formed. They had assassination squads. We know from the Korean War that there was mind-altering drug experimentations being done by the Chinese. We know the Japanese were doing it in World War II with some of what we found out after we defeated them. And someone said we have to match them at least.
Yeah, there was a mind control gap.
There's a mind control gap, right? So they caught up quick. So and then there was the fight in the 50s for third world ex-colonial countries, the European countries in Northern Africa and in Middle East that were colonies, were getting their independence between the United States and the Soviet Union, a battle for the hearts and minds of these people. And it's really, it kind of created a rogue mentality. That's how it kind of led to the JFK assassination. And it all was done in the name of anti-communism. What do we have to do to defeat communism, control it? And JFK didn't go along with that. They sabotaged Truman at that Korean War. They sabotaged Eisenhower with that U-2 flight that was shot down. Francis Gary Powers. That was sabotage. It was done because Eisenhower was he's like weeks away from going to Russia to meet with Khrushchev to sign a nuclear test ban treaty. Obviously, that never happened. So, I mean, and there were military generals, 4 of them that resigned at the end of Eisenhower's presidency because they thought we should be going in basically a nuclear hardline attack. We had a superiority in nuclear weapons. We could obliterate them. Sure, the United States would lose a couple of cities, but they wanted to do it. When they didn't do it, they resigned. They wrote books. Eisenhower was looking into calling them back into service just to shut them up. And he said it was treasonous. He looked at it treasonous. And one of the famous, I'll paraphrase what he said, but considering what happened to Kennedy, who came after Eisenhower, he said, I know how military minds think. I'm a military man. He said, God help the guy that comes after me who isn't prepared to deal with these people.
Wow.
And he was so right.
Wow. What were their names? Was it Lemnitzer? It was like a LeMay.
It wasn't Lemnitzer.
Okay.
It was Maxwell Taylor was one guy. I can't think of their names right now. There was 4 of them.
But they may not have been involved, but Kennedy had his own group of crazies.
Yes.
I don't know what Eisenhower, but LeMay was just out of his mind. Like these guys were.
LeMay.
Lemnitzer too, yeah.
Well, LeMay is like the guy from Doctor Strangelove. That's what it was based on, right? I mean, he was like, yeah, let's nuke them. And in fact, he said at one time, nuclear war. He said, we don't look. Someone will eventually stop, so we won't blow up the entire world. That was his philosophy.
It's just insane. And I think
LeMay
LeMay was the one who firebombed Japan, killed millions of people.
was.
Like, yeah,
he was
just a genocidal maniac. Yeah. So.
And then just to show you where he fit into the big picture, and I think it was when George Wallace ran for president in '68 or whatever it was, he was his running mate.
Wow.
And he was, believe it or not, embarrassed George Wallace. And it's just too far out there for even a George Wallace to have. I mean, he was just, Kennedy hated him. And Lemnitzer was another guy, who was head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff until after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where these people showed their true colors. And Kennedy then had him transferred to head NATO just to get him out of the United States. And he just, he looked at these people as crazy, and he understood who these people were, but he also took them on head on. And everything that they stood for, he did not, and he fought them. And if you go back through from the 1930s up to say 1960 and see what was happening, and then you look at what John Kennedy did, his American University speech in June 1963, where he was basically calling for coexistence with the Soviets. And he was saying, look, we cherish our children's future, as do they. We both live on the same planet. We breathe the same air. He started selling them wheat. He signed the nuclear test ban treaty that Eisenhower couldn't do. But the way he did it was he sent Averell Harriman over there, and Kennedy got on the phone as if he were in the room, unprecedented for an American president to do that, and supervised the negotiations. Wow. Then it had to pass Congress. He bypassed Congress. He went to the American people, and basically there was a public relations blitz because the people wanted a nuclear test ban treaty, and Congress had no choice but to approve it. Right? He was trying to normalize relations with Fidel Castro. And he was Vietnam, of course, trying to pull out, and it was one thing after the other. And so, I mean, they could not say sabotage him in any way. They tried to. So I think they had one choice.
He had real life war experience too. I know that some of the people he went to World War II with didn't make it back, like his brother didn't.
Right.
So
he
had a different context than some of these people who sat behind desks.
He did. And he and Robert Kennedy, his brother, took a trip when he was either congressman or a senator, when JFK was, to Southeast Asia. And he saw firsthand what the French were doing when they were still fighting the Vietnamese. And he saw that. He said, this is an unwinnable war. You can't do it in a conventional way. These are guerrilla fighters. And that's why he wanted to pull out of that war. And he basically just told his people, he said, I can't do it now because the American people won't understand. I will not get reelected. So he said, make damn sure I get reelected. We'll pull out of Vietnam. And of course, he never had the chance to do that.
It just escalated. It got worse.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Once LBJ came in. But, LBJ, I'm sure, was under a lot of pressure. No one understood. And then, once you go down that rabbit hole, it's hard to pull out. And we've seen it, right? I mean, you can't get involved in an engagement with another country and then just say, okay, we made a mistake, so let's just stop. The president's not going to do that. He's looking for an honorable way out. Next thing you know, we go from Johnson to Nixon. And, Nixon had his own issues. And then and the next thing you know, we've got the same people with Nixon involved in Watergate, who were involved with the Bay of Pigs and in other nefarious operations during Eisenhower and Kennedy's years. So it's
incredible. McCord and what was it?
Howard Hunt.
Howard Hunt, yeah.
But the thing about McCord too, which is incredible, you know the story of Frank Olson, the fellow that fell out of right.
But retell it again.
Yes, just in case your listeners don't know. I mean, Frank Olson was worked for U.S. government, CIA, do mind-altering drug experimentation out of Fort Detrick in Maryland, and was involved then at the time at Camp King in post-World War II in Germany with Nazi prisoners. And he went over and found that the United States military intelligence over there was actually experimenting with these people and mind-altering drugs, but LSD. And so, well, he objected to it, wanted to get out. And so they called a meeting near Camp Detrick, a handful of people, and they fed a number of these people, including Frank Olson, LSD without his knowledge. And it had a terrible effect on him, between anxiety, depression, just suicidal. And so he wound up in New York there was some kind of a meeting, convention related to what he was doing. And he wound up getting thrown. They said he committed suicide and jumped through a 13-story window, I think a Statler Hotel in New York. But it turned out he was thrown out, and the CIA eventually paid his family years later in the 70s. But the interesting thing is, after it was over, and he had a roommate who was staying in the hotel room with him, who called whoever he answered to at the CIA. What happened? And the guy who showed up to knock at the door was James McCord, the same guy who was involved Bay of Pigs, involved Watergate, and it's just an incredible. I mean, how these people. It's too bad that none of them really told us exactly what they were up to.
Yeah, it really is. There's a whole secret history of those guys because they're everywhere. E. Howard Hunt was in a very important position as the head of the CIA office in Mexico City.
That's right.
And then he's at Watergate. Like, it's just very strange. Like, this is a high-level CIA operative.
Well, there's right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, some people think that he was put there to bungle the Watergate entry so that it would lead to Nixon's downfall. Have you heard of that theory, or do you believe that theory?
I have. I do. I think we need some more evidence. But when you trace the path, right? I mean, you have Kennedy getting assassinated, who wants to pull out of Vietnam. LBJ comes in, and then LBJ eventually either just tires of all the killings or whatever. He's starting to change how he feels. And when Robert Kennedy decides he's going to run for president in 1968, LBJ drops out. Then Robert Kennedy mysteriously gets assassinated. Then Martin Luther King, who could galvanize the black vote for Robert Kennedy, he got assassinated first. Richard Nixon wins. Then Richard Nixon goes to Russia, goes to China, opens these doors, pulls out of Vietnam, ends that war. He then mysteriously the Watergate break-in. These professional CIA operatives,
like super experienced,
30, 40 years, break into foreign embassies, do all this stuff. Can't even break into the Watergate Hotel without a security guard finding something, right? It doesn't make any sense. Then Nixon's gone. Who steps in? Gerald Ford, who was a Warren commissioner, one of the leaders, right? And who was the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover's eyes and ears on the commission, who would tell him everything that was going on. And even though all these guys agreed that none of them would write a book until or publish anything until the Warren Commission report came out, Ford jumped the gun and did it anyway. And then Ford lasts one term, and then we wind up with Ronald Reagan, who kind of puts the country back on that right-wing course again. So you wonder, is it all a coincidence? Maybe, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's by design, and maybe there's this deep state behind the scenes that's pulling some strings and just, making things happen.
That's been there probably since probably all throughout America. Well, maybe not as much, but definitely post World War II.
Yes.
And Ford's vice president is Nelson Rockefeller.
Yeah, right.
And so-called Squeaky Fromm takes a shot at Ford, misses him by an inch.
Right.
And it would have made Nelson Rockefeller president. That story, nobody tells that story. considering all the fake patsies and assassinations, she was probably just there as a cover story, as a patsy. Somebody probably else tried to take a shot at Ford to put
yes.
to put Nelson Rockefeller in power. So yeah, I mean that's
That
my
Rockefeller,
guess.
right? The Rockefeller family had a history going back to even the 30s, right? They're one of the most powerful families in the country, and everything they were involved in internationally. I mean, it was I think it was David Rockefeller in the 30s who he talked about a new world order, right? They all going back to that era talked about a new world order, which was basically what did Henry Luce called it not like a Pax Americana, that we were basically going to control the world. We were going to dictate how things were done. Third world countries were going to come under our influence, not the Soviet Union. We were going to basically wait them out. And next thing you know, we'd be running things. But, greed gets in the way of a lot of things. And I think that's what happened. And
but in a lot of ways, the U.S. won World War II and really were the predominant power.
Yes.
The Russians had some kind of power, but not like the U.S., the financial power, and the people basically lived, So the U.S. could throw over these grand chessboards. You mentioned David Talbot's book in your book.
Yes.
It really was a chessboard, just pulling them over. And like you said, you mentioned in your intro how many of these other people they pulled off. Turkey, Adnan Menderes. Somebody tried to kill Charles de Gaulle. Karim Qasem, they install Hussein, right? Syria, Guatemala, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, Honduras, and Vietnam. I mean,
that's on and on.
It just goes on and on.
And then that
doesn't include Iran, the Mossadegh overthrow.
That's right. And then that, and then we're winding up with Nazi operatives down there helping us out, and people whose names will show up again later on as potential conspirators in the assassination of JFK. And then in Iraq, one of the guys that they're relying on to overthrow the government, it didn't happen. It took a couple of years for it to happen, was Saddam Hussein. I mean, and then when you wonder sometimes why people look at our country around the world, maybe with a jaundiced eye, because as soon as we're done with them, there's no loyalty. I mean, not that we should have had loyalty to Saddam Hussein, but he's history and he's done. And
right.
But we don't mind getting in bed with the devil when we have to, and at least we haven't.
Well, the American people don't know their own history. They're not taught this side of history. So that's why, it's a shame. But they can go. I mean, we don't dictate our foreign policy. The people don't have anything to say about foreign policy. It's either some elite or something like that's making that decision for you.
Of course.
And I actually interviewed the daughter. Her father was one of the CIA handlers for Saddam Hussein in what's the country north of Israel? Like not Syria,
Jordan,
the one more, Beirut. They were in Beirut in Lebanon.
Yeah.
So they were in Lebanon, shuttling, getting him into power. They knew he was their guy, and they were going to put him in the power. And then the CIA overthrows him and hunts him down in 2002, 2003. So they were done with him.
Well, name of my book is It Did Not Start with JFK. I think at some point there's going to be It Did Not End with JFK either, because it's like just a continual path of it should upset most Americans. And I think if people know the history, and that's the feedback I'm getting from people who have read it, saying we weren't taught any of this in school. It's not. Why weren't we? I mean, we can handle the truth, and especially if there's a good reason. But a lot of times there was not a good reason for all of this, other than power. And I'm sure Vladimir Putin thinks he has a good reason for going into Ukraine now. But I would think that most of the Russian people don't agree with it, and it's kind of reflective of what our history has been. That kind of disconnect between the leadership and the people of the country.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Because we were tinkering around in there too. We were tinkering around the Ukraine in 2014, isn't that right? The U.S.
Yeah, we've been everywhere. I think I mean, and sometimes we almost push buttons and try and instigate. Like 1956 is a prime example. We're promising, in Hungary is like they're on the verge of revolting out of away from the Soviet Union. They're a satellite country, and the CIA is kind of in there, and we're basically telling these people, they're operatives, we've got your back, and they revolt, and we don't do anything, and it turns out to be a slaughter, and but it served its purpose for what we wanted, which was to demonstrate to the world, a lot of third world countries are looking and thinking, maybe the Russian form of government or the Soviets are better than the United States. They looked at our race relation problems and different things in our country, and they didn't appreciate that, especially countries where people of color predominated. And so what we wanted was to just show the world what the Soviets were really like, and had tanks marching down the streets of Budapest and just slaughtering innocent people, and so yeah, that's.
And the CIA was behind that. I think it was Frank Wisner, one of the original.
It was Frank Wisner,
and he cracked. He didn't.
He did.
He had a breakdown due to, I think, because of those people who died. He knew he was responsible for it. Eventually committed suicide, right?
He did. Now, Frank Wisner was with OSS in the eastern part of Europe at the end of World War II, and after Yalta, the Soviets and the English and the United States signed agreements of what we would do and have democratic elections in all of these countries. Well, it didn't happen. So Wisner's over in Eastern Europe, and he's seeing the Soviet armies Red Army coming in, rounding up all people who were opposed to the Soviets in these countries, who wanted democracy, putting them on trains and shipping them back to gulags in the Soviet Union. And he was beside himself with what he saw, and that's how he became such an anti-communist. And then when this happened in Hungary, you're right, that was a bunch of things, but that was kind of like the last nail in the coffin for him. He just couldn't understand why we were standing by and doing absolutely nothing to help these people. And it was never the intent to help them. It was just to create this image.
Right, but they knew they were going to sell them out, betray them to the Russians. That's still the present. The Russians, the reason that they've always had problems with their frontiers, they've been invaded brutally twice.
Yes.
And so they're always worried about, and that ties into exactly what's happening in Ukraine right now, is that they've had those. I mean, the Great Patriotic War, 1/8 of the Russian population was killed. So they have very sensitive about that. So I don't know why the United States is over there. I don't know. We have a lot more things to worry about, in my opinion. But I think you mentioned in your book too, I think it was Wisner, but all these guys post World War II came up together, and they had all strange things: Angleton, Colby, Wisner, White.
Right.
They just permeated, and probably E. Howard Hunt. I don't know what happened to Hunt in World War II, but they all went to, and George Bush, right? George Bush Sr.
Right. Well, these people, it was kind of like a natural progression to go from OSS to those private intelligence groups that I mentioned to the CIA. And they all were very, very strong anti-communists. And when they came together, they were trained the same way. Angleton, George Hunter White, Wisner, Allen Dulles. I mean, Allen Dulles was trying to create some kind of a peace treaty with the Nazi army that was in northern Italy, and basically they wanted to stop the Red Army from getting to Berlin, and they were willing to just say, look, we'll take care of Hitler, we'll get rid of Hitler, and just let us create a democracy, or not a democracy, but a temporary like military government that'll become a democracy. But FDR had said unconditional surrender. He wasn't going to change that. But all of these people, they were trained in George Hunter White called this camp in Canada that he called it the camp of murder and mayhem. And that's what they were trained in. Lucien Conine, one of the Jedburghs, right? This elite group that would parachute behind the lines into France and into Eastern Europe. Colby was one. Tracy Barnes was another one from the CIA.
But nobody knows his name, right? I mean, he's less familiar, but
he's
very
less familiar. he is a very important person because he became head of the Domestic Contacts Division in the United States in the early 60s. And it was, according to George de Morenscheit, he was instructed by this CIA fellow Moore, who was under Tracy Barnes, to approach Lee Harvey Oswald. And so this Tracy Barnes is a very important. The quiet guys who are in the background, even the James Angletons, you don't hear too much about him. The ones who are quiet are the ones that really, I think, dictate policy and call the shots.
It's incredible.
It really is.
Yeah, you can see that the CIA probably was almost a continuation of the private intelligence ethos, because once they got the funds from the taxpayer, there was barely any really effective oversight. Maybe till the Church Committee, I don't know.
You're right.
Like, yeah, I mean, they just had they had funds to just cause murder and mayhem. I mean, White was part of Operation Climax in the Haight-Ashbury, drugging people more and drinking like a fifth of scotch a day, just like impervious to no consequences, like no oversight.
Nothing. And it started in New York with him. And basically, you have FBI documents that saying, like, we don't know what this guy's doing. He's like ex-OSS guy. Then he's at CIA. Next thing you know, or excuse me, then he gets lent to CIA. But he was with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, gets lent to CIA from them. And he opening a safe house in New York City, and then wound up doing it in San Francisco, and basically to using prostitutes to lure people up to this safe house, giving them LSD and just trying to see what the effects were. They were interested in seeing, could you say get information out of a person by using LSD? Let's say they're thinking more in terms of war, but they have to practice on somebody. Can you send someone to another country and have them programmed to tell who's going to capture them what you want them to say? Can you, with LSD, keep them from spilling the beans of what you don't want them to say? Can you program to assassinate somebody? So he was in the middle of all of this man. And then William Harvey was another one, right? I mean, he's another name that goes from OSS to CIA, who was head of the assassination, ZR Rifle, the whole assassination squad. I mean, he's there with White, with Angleton, with Jean-Pierre Lafitte, who was an associate of George Hunter White. And these people played for keeps, and Richard Bissell. If there's one mantra the CIA had in the 50s and in the early 60s, it was, the world would have been a better place if someone had killed Adolf Hitler. And of course, that's true. But you don't know who a Hitler is until he becomes a Hitler, right? So, but with that kind of logic, if you feel like there's someone, be it a JFK or somebody else, who you think is going to do irreparable damage to the United States, you can justify assassination or murder or whatever else. And I really think that's had a lot to do with killing JFK.
They really thought he was a threat, like their view. I think you make that statement. The country was changing. There was more racial equality type things happening. JFK's Catholic, Irish, right?
Right.
These are generally white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So at that time, today, those tensions may not be as overt, but at that time, that was significant. Would you agree with that?
100%. And the racial component was huge, especially among Southerners. And a lot of these people were Southerners. And you had the whole a group of Congress of Southern white men that, starting in the 50s, was it 57 with Little Rock, Arkansas, right? So and just in general about racial equality just starting, and JFK making. I mean, there's 3 days in the summer of 1963 where you had what I mentioned before, the American University speech about normalization of relations with the Soviet Union. Then you had the standoff at the University of Alabama, where the first African-American students were allowed to attend that college. George Wallace stood at the entrance and said he wasn't going to allow him in. Right, this was a year after James Meredith was allowed into the University of Mississippi. So you had that in happening in Alabama. George Wallace stood aside. That night, Kennedy went on national television to talk about race relations and talk about how, every American, regardless of who you are, should be entitled to the same opportunities and the same chance. And he rattled off statistics as far as the odds on, say a black child versus a white child going to college, getting a good job, what have you. And then it was it the next day or whatever? If I'm off by a day, it doesn't matter. But that's when Medgar Evers gets shot in the back in his own driveway. A black civil rights activist, a peaceful activist, basically in front of his own kids and wife. So, if there was a point, I think, where the die was cast for JFK, it was at June 1963. That was 3 days where it wasn't just the international anti-communist, is your point of the racial turmoil that the country, or the upheaval, the transformation that some people were trying to bring to this country and others were trying to resist. I think it just sealed his fate.
Wow. Yeah. Sealed his and a lot of other people. There's a lot of people surrounding this whole thing whose lives were ruined or had strange deaths. There were journalists who died. There's just so many suspicious things. It was really, the 60s it was like watching a serial killing. There were just so many assassinations of important people and cleanups, and it was really a tragedy. I think really tragic.
It was. I mean, there were well-known people, obviously, like Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, but then there were lesser people too. That some of them who just knew too much wound up getting killed because they had to be quieted, or just were in a position I mean, Dorothy Kilgallen is one person. There's a host of others that just Mary Pinchot Meyer, right? Who's JFK's girlfriend, who got murdered the year after JFK was assassinated. I mean, it just goes on and on. It doesn't seem, like I said, it's just they could justify their behavior.
Right. And I think you should write that book, What Happened After. I think that would be a good one. Is there anything you'd like to add, Walter, or anything I missed before we wrap it up? We're at about the 60-minute mark.
No, I think we're good. It's just that, I mean, it's I think people will enjoy the book. I think knowing why we got to that point is just as important as what happened, or you appreciate or can understand what happens once you understand why or what preceded it. And I think it's an important aspect of the investigation, and it does cover a lot of what we discussed too. It brings into play the assassination elements, Ruby, Oswald, and what they were doing. But anyone interested, they can. Amazon is the best place, or anywhere where books are sold. You can probably get it. And
there's a lot more in here. We didn't cover all the LBJ stuff, the deep in the heart of Texas, CIA, even more lawlessness and stuff that they got away with. The situation in the third world. It was there's a lot of conflict post. It's surprising, but in the world even after World War II, the conflict never stopped. So it really just kept going. And this was all the Korea. I mean, there's just a lot more in this book. This is only volume 1. So I'd love to have you back on, talk about volume 2.
That'd be great.
Awesome. Where's the best place for people to reach you? Do you have a website, social media, contact information?
Yeah, you can reach me at my website, which is walter@herbstbooks.com, and herbstbooks.com is my website. And then there's Walter Herbst Author on Facebook. And those are the best places to reach me.
So Walter Herbst Author on Facebook, and then Herbst, but HERBST books.com.
Right. Walter@herbstbooks.com. But if you go to Herbst Books, there'll be some an icon you can click on that you can reach me.
Gotcha. Cool. And again, title of the book is It Did Not Start with JFK, Volume 1, The Decades of Events That Led to the Assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the author is Walter Herbst. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, William.
All right, stay there.